Welcome to Orange Weekly, presented by Krause Health, alongside Nate Mink. I'm Brent. Coming up, we'll hear from Mike Waters on the start of Syracuse basketball. What was just about game one, and what are some of the things we saw in that first game that Syracuse will have to continue to work on? Plus, the Orange will have to adjust without Barama Sidibe in the lineup. We'll hear from Syracuse football head coach Dino Babers and Syracuse Soundbites coming up as well about playing Notre Dame. And that's something Nate and I will discuss here shortly as we'll welcome in Nate Mink. Nate, the Irish are coming up, going to be a tall task for the Orange, but it feels like this one's more about the end of a season and not a last game.
Right. It's really the culmination of a long season in these parts. Really, it started all the way back in August. Quite frankly, we didn't even know if this thing was ever going to get off the ground. And then once it did get off the ground, it really started to unravel fairly quickly with the number of injuries and different kind of opt-outs that has stricken this team this season. And, you know, they're sitting here this weekend at 1-9. I think everyone agrees that it's probably going to end in 1-10, which, you know, it hasn't happened here very, very often, certainly only twice in the last 70 plus years here. So one of those quirky years that, you know, a lot of people are going to be looking to turn the page on it. And I do think there, you know, as we've seen throughout the year, given the number of freshmen and young contributors that have been thrust into action, you know, this is going to be, I think, still a good experience for some of those young guys. Anytime you can play the quality of competition that Notre Dame is going to bring into the game on Saturday, that is, as Dino Babers likes to say, iron sharpening iron for sure.
Yeah, that was certainly going to be the case of this team. And there's one guy that kind of exemplifies that more than any, Nate. You wrote about him a little this week. Dino Babers discussed him in his press conference. Mr. Everything for this team, Chris Elmore. I mean, he has been asked to play almost every position on the field. Syracuse has had a little trouble at quarterback. They might as well throw him in there against Notre Dame and see how it goes. But is there a player that kind of exemplifies what this team had to do just to get on the field more than Chris Elmore this season?
No, he's it. I mean, you look at really going back again to the preseason, the number of injuries that hit that offensive line. You know, they were tiptoeing that line on whether or not they were even going to, again, play or play all 11 or see what you can do until you get some of those offensive linemen back into the mix. And Elmore was a guy that, you know, agreed to make this transition back in August to play a position, quite frankly, he hadn't played since 8th grade. And, you know, he held his own throughout those 9 games that he played at left guard, you know, and, you know, he kind of held the fort down as best he could. You know, that unit and that offense still obviously is not where it wants to be for sure. But, you know, when you look at 2020 and you try to encapsulate it, you know, it took extraordinary circumstances in a lot of cases just to be able to field the team. And look, I mean, you know, Syracuse isn't the only team that was tiptoeing that line about whether they had enough players to play or not. You look at Vanderbilt earlier in the season, they actually missed a game because their numbers were too low. Mississippi State, believe it or not, is under 50 scholarship players.
Wow.
You know, we think Syracuse being under 60 is a big deal, and it is. Mississippi State's playing under 50. And guess how many games Mississippi State and Vanderbilt have won since their numbers have gotten low? Combined, 1. So when you're playing with the type of roster that Syracuse and some other teams around the country are playing with, you're not supposed to win games. And you know, Syracuse hasn't won games, but there's reasons for that. And you know, going back to Elmore and some of the things that this team has had to deal with this season, that's about as good an explanation as any.
This is a team that's been licking its wounds all season, Nate. They're particularly doing that this week. The psychological damage that comes from that situation, you're right there, 7-yard line, a chance to at least, at the very least, tie NC State, maybe take it to overtime, or maybe win that game. If you score, get a 2-point conversion. It was kind of a crazy situation. The sack on 3rd down from Rex Culpepper in a situation you just couldn't take the sack, and then 4th and goal, he spikes the football, as we now know. So that's enough to recover from. And then you get Notre Dame as your next opponent, a team that is right there in the conversation to win the national championship. They joined the ACC for a season, and they're in the ACC championship game. Nate, this is one of the biggest mismatches on paper I can remember Syracuse playing, not only in the Babers era, but just in recent memory. I mean, certainly those Clemson games and some good teams they've played qualify, but this is the best Notre Dame team I've certainly seen under Brian Kelly in a long time.
I agree. I think this team is a lot better than certainly the team that went undefeated in 2012 and got the doors blown off of them by Alabama in the title game. And then even a couple years ago when they were a playoff team in 2018, Ian Book was a sophomore on that team. Now he's a senior, and that team has matured. I'm with you. I'll make this pretty succinct. Notre Dame has a boatload of seniors. Syracuse has a ton of freshmen. These teams could not be in opposite places, right? Could not be in more opposite places right now. It's that simple. This is an old, veteran, mature Notre Dame team, particularly on both sides of the ball at scrimmage and in the defensive front and at quarterback. And you're right. I mean, it's just Notre Dame is the antithesis of Syracuse this season.
I'm going to spare us a prediction. I think we both think Notre Dame's going to win, and we'll leave it at that. I think it's going to be a big win by Notre Dame. Maybe they call off the dogs a little bit after getting a big lead in the first half, but I'll close with this instead, Nate. A thank you to you, because the football conversation is going to start to wind down a little bit here with the season over. We'll certainly track things in the off season and see how Dino Babers and company rebuilds this thing. But thanks as always for joining us here throughout the season on Orange Weekly. We'll certainly chat again soon.
Absolutely. Should be an interesting off season for sure.
Thanks to Nate. We'll hear from Mike Waters coming up shortly, but right now it's time for Syracuse Soundbites. Here's Syracuse football head coach Dino Babers on having to play Notre Dame year in and year out.
I don't know. They've had such a national image, being by themselves, that they could go anywhere. But, I've been recruiting in the ACC. I feel like we can go anywhere to recruit. I'm not sure. Notre Dame is obviously it's a little bit different with its history. I would imagine that they can go into any place and everybody's going to always know, who they are and what they stand for. So I'd probably be a wash, I guess would be the best way to put the answer.
Our friend Mike Waters is here from syracuse.com as we're in that kind of football, basketball crossover mode here. Football playing its last game of the season, but basketball just getting started. And Mike, what a start it was for the Syracuse basketball team against Bryant. We'll get to that here shortly, but a big loss for the Orange in that Barama Sidibe, we know, has a torn knee meniscus that he suffered early in that Bryant game. And, the adjustment is one thing, as we'll discuss, Mike, but man, your heart's got to go out to this kid. Just when he was back in the flow and looking like somebody who was going to make a big impact and finally seeing the type of player he is healthy, he gets hurt again.
I know. It really is sad because I had high hopes for Barama coming into this year. And, he struggled with knee issues during his first 2 years in the program. He had surgery, to address the tendonitis in his knees after his freshman year, played behind Pascal Chukwu for a couple of those years, but still wasn't able to get the minutes that I think the coaches expected him to have when they brought him in. And then last year, it was his first year as a starter, first year healthy. And I think he had to get used to a lot of stuff. Jim Boeheim said several times during the season, it's really his first full year here. And so there were some growing pains. But man, over the last 10 games of the regular season, he played so well. And especially the last 6 games where he had those, 10 or more rebounds in each of those games. It was an incredible streak. And, and then to see him leave the game basically, just 4 or 5 minutes into the opener, and then to learn on Monday that he's got a torn meniscus. And I guess he's fortunate there. It's not an ACL that would have ended the season or something like that. The meniscus is a little bit easier to address. They're saying a recovery time of about 4 weeks, which would put him at the beginning of January. But then he's going to have, he's going to have to get back in the swing of things. So you can't just, expect him to come right back and be the same player on January 2nd. But if they can get him back then, they'll find it. But it does give a little bit of opportunity, trying to put a positive spin on this. It gives an opportunity for some other guys maybe to show what they can do.
Marek Dolezaj, notably, Mike, he's played the 5 before. He knows how to do it, but it's different when it's full time as opposed to having to get in there in certain spots. The big thing, and stop me if you heard this one before with Marek, is he's got to avoid foul trouble. It's a little harder to do when you're playing the position, for over 30 minutes as opposed to here and there.
Yeah, he's played the position in the last 3 years at times as kind of like the emergency guy. He was the guy they turned to last year when Barama was either struggling or in foul trouble, and Marek would move to the 5. And you're right, foul trouble would then become an issue for Marek, but he's a little bit stronger this year, a year older. Hopefully that, he can avoid some of those foul situations. I mean, he'll really be tested, when they get in against some more major competition, major conference teams like Rutgers and Boston College, looking ahead a week. And so that would be an issue. But then you're going to have to look at younger players, Frank Anselm, Jesse Edwards, even John Bolajak. But I think, Jesse and Frank right now seem to be the ones that are going to get the first opportunity to step in there and probably be the backup to Marek. I think the lineup you'll see is Marek at the 5 with Quincy and Alan Griffin at the forward spots.
Alan Griffin had a pretty impressive debut for Syracuse. I wanted to mention him here shortly, but before we go over his game, Mike, boy, what a debut for Syracuse. They won the game. End of the day, you never apologize for a win. But what a circumstance. 12 days off the practice floor, 1 day of practice on Thanksgiving, and then they play the day after Thanksgiving. And it was a wild game, a game that Jim Boeheim admitted afterwards. Maybe they shouldn't have played because they weren't ready to do it. So what were the things you take away from that game that were just that night, forget about it, but what are some things maybe that are lingering that this team is going to have to work on?
Things that were that night, and I'm not going to worry about it too much, are Joe Girard missing his first 11 shots. I don't think we'll see that again anytime soon. But, Joe did show you what kind of intestinal fortitude that he has when he makes 2 big shots down the stretch, including one that, that gave Syracuse the lead in the final minutes there. Just, incredible shot to even consider taking when you're 1 for something on the night and then to make it 2. So, we'll put Joe's performance aside for a brief moment. Things you got to worry about, probably you're worried a little bit about the defense. Giving up 80 some odd points to a team like Bryan is not a good thing. But you know what? A lot of that was that really poor first half when I think they just weren't ready to play. You mentioned the long layoff and only 1 day of practice. And, they gave up 51 first half points on 53 or 54% field goal shooting. But you notice in the second half, 31 points, 34% shooting. They played really good defense in the second half. Maybe not, 2018, the team that goes to the Sweet 16 type of great defense, but still a big improvement. So I think we focused a lot on that first half about how bad the defense was. And even after the game was over, there was a lot of hand wringing about how bad the defense was, but it can get better, but it's still a little bit of a concern looking ahead. They got a lot of work to do on the defensive end, especially up top.
Surreal moment in that game, Mike, and you were in the dome for this. Alan Griffin soars up off a alley-oop pass from Joe Girard, slams it home. That normally would have been, no matter how many fans are in the place, would have blown the roof off of it, and it's met by the sounds of silence, right? So that was odd to see, but the talent on that play, the scoring of Alan Griffin, the type of player he was, the rebounding, what a debut for him, and I think Syracuse fans are going to get used to this.
I know. Listen, it was if there was anything that was a shame about not having fans there, the whole game, everyone can watch on TV and have a good time and stuff like that. But to not have fans there to react to that dunk off of what was basically a half-court pass from Joe Girard, I mean, that dunk was incredible. And it should have been played in an arena in front of at least 20,000 fans who all could have lost their collective minds. They didn't. But, Alan did, I thought, for a debut in a new program. I thought he had a great game. Comes in off the bench, which I was a little surprised at. I thought he'd get the nod as the starter. I think he starts, going forward here with Barama out. But to score 17 points in your debut and then to double down on it and get 13 rebounds for a double-double. I mean, a debut double-double. And we talked about this kid leading into the season about how he had averaged about 8.9 points and about 5.5 rebounds a game while playing barely half a game at Illinois. And we thought, what could he do if those minutes, maybe even if the minutes don't even double, but, if he gets anywhere between 30 and 35 minutes a game, I mean, and he showed you, boom, right off the bat, 17 and 13, good to go. And that I really focused in on those 13 rebounds. We know he can shoot and score. We saw that at Illinois, 41% 3-point shooter. But the fact that 13 boards from a 6'5" guy, and I know the opponent was Bryant, and they're not a huge team, but it's the aggressiveness. He was so active and went for the ball on both ends of the floor. That's something I haven't seen a Syracuse small forward do in a very long time. There's been some good players, Elijah Hughes, Andrew White, guys like that, Malachi Richardson. But you wouldn't have said any of those guys was really like, such an active, ferocious, intense rebounder. And I think that is going to be a big help for Syracuse this season, to get that kind of intensity out of a 6'5" guy at the 3.
That is Orange Weekly, presented by Krause Health. Thanks to Mike Waters. Thanks to Nate Mink for joining us. We'll talk to you next time.